Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 1% Better Recruitment Podcast with your host, Charles Kiriakou. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Arran Collymore, who is the Director of Business Development at Add Some Zest. Arran and I have worked with each other for about, 6 months now or so, Arran, is that right?
Yeah, about that.
Yeah. And every single time we sit down, honestly, if we had a little mini camera and a mini podcast mic, we could probably have some good shows. So I'm sure today's show is going to be a very good one. Before we crack on then, Arran, if you don't mind, give us a bit of an introduction to you and your recruitment career.
Cool, perfect. So yeah, first of all, thanks for the invite, Charles. Good to be here. So I suppose an overview on me. So I'm Arran. I currently work at a business called Add Some Zest and head up business development. Prior to that, most of my career has been spent in 360 recruitment. I started my career at Michael Page, spent a year there, then joined a business called Robertson Sumner doing tech sales recruitment. Was there for 6.5 years, top biller for 5 of those years, and then left to help build a startup in Add Some Zest. So yeah, and that's me in a nutshell.
Nice. So every single time Arran and I sit down, we always end up having long conversations around BD process, the approach to all aspects of business development, the mindset. And both Arran and I have a lot of experience in pitching and selling retainers. And we both, where you work at Zest, use a slightly different platform, but I used a very similar thing as well. So we're going to cover a range of topics all around business development, mindset, retainers, etc., etc. The first topic that we wanted to cover in today's show was the mindset and approach for business development in recruitment today. So I think, to be honest, I think a good start for this, Arran, would be, because you've got a very unique approach to things. I don't really speak to a lot of recruiters that have your type of approach. Why don't you talk us through your approach to business development these days?
Cool. Good question. My approach to business development is I get really, really specific on fixing a different problem to what I think the majority of recruiters fix. So I think that the vast majority of recruiters fix talent attraction problems. And I focus most of my time on fixing the assessment bit of that situation. So I typically speak to people or speak to companies that have previously hired or have hired fairly recently. And I try and uncover if they've had challenges around certain stages of their hiring process, i.e. a candidate comes in they have 15 people top of funnel for their when they get CVs through the door. How many of those are through no choice of the companies ending up dropping out? And that's the thing that I try and fix. And I try and get people thinking about what impact would it be if you were able to predictably hire your top pick every time, or your top 1 or 2 picks every single time. What would the impact be on your business? What would it be? What would it do for the team? So that's typically the problem that I fix. And I think that's really important to get clear on early, because if you're not clear on the problem, then everything else you do in business development is kind of pointless, in my opinion. So hopefully that gives you some context.
Yeah, it certainly does. I wanted to get your opinion on what you think typical BD looks like in recruitment in 2024, because I obviously work with a variety of different recruitment businesses. Now I work for myself, and I've worked within a fair few when I was obviously employed. Now I think and you and I have had this conversation about the traditional style of recruitment, where it is a simple case of, maybe you have a fake candidate, or maybe you've got a semi-decent candidate, you mass mail them out to 100 companies, or, you're spending 2 till 3 to cold call people, and 9 times out of 10 people's introductions are just absolutely just
terrible,
dog water. But what's your thoughts on recruitment, like how people typically do recruitment nowadays, or business development, I should say?
To be fair, I don't know that much about the wider market. I have an idea, but I'm not doing it, so I don't know for certain what people are doing. But what I imagine people are doing, again, if they're still specking out CVs, still just chasing down those CVs, I just think it is a very, very transactional approach. And I think actually, if you want to sell retainers or you want to get more committed work, you can't act the same way that every other recruiter will act. So if 98% of recruiters are specking CVs and just randomly cold calling people when they see a live job or chasing leads, and then they're confused why they don't win retainers, it's kind of like, well, you're just approaching it wrong. You're probably approaching it wrong, and you're probably approaching the wrong person, is my thought. So that's what I imagine people are doing, but I don't know for certain.
Yeah, I think largely you're right. But I think the one thing that you and I can probably agree on is the mindset people have going into business development. Now, I don't know if it was the same for you, but for me, it took me a little while to really truly understand my worth, really understand the value that I can offer. Because I work with so many recruiters, and I feel kind of bad for them because they approach a business development call. And I've been there myself, where you kind of hope it goes to voicemail because you'd have no confidence and you don't really believe in what you're selling, and you're like, oh
Yeah,
well, there's one call on my KPI sheet that I can tick off. But
yeah,
people get off on the phone, and a client will sit there and say, we don't want to work with recruiters. And they're like, yeah, I get that. You have to pay a big fee for me to go and find you a candidate. I get it. I think that's completely wrong. I think that's the complete wrong mindset, the complete wrong approach.
hmm
You and I have a very similar mindset. And I think your mindset at the moment, and you're obviously doing the job and doing business development in the recruitment space. Tell me about I want to talk about firstly what your mindset is now, and we'll talk about how you kind of got to there. But what is your mindset when you do approach a business development call and business development activity?
My thought is, I think anytime that I'm doing anything from a that's cold or net new, um, I'm really doing it just to try and understand if there even is a problem. That's it. So I'm not doing a cold call or any cold outreach to actually try and sell who I am, who Zest are, what I've done before. Because ultimately, if they haven't got a problem, it doesn't matter how good I am. If they are amazing, finding, hiring, they always get the person they want. They don't need me, and that's fine. I can just move on. And I don't get super caught up in that. I just think that I have an obligation to help the people that I could help if they just knew about me. That's how I think of business development. Like, so it is just about having as many different touch points with people that you believe could have the problem and figuring out if they do have the problem. That's all I'm doing on that first conversation. So actually, if someone says to me, I don't have that problem, then that's fine. I just move on and find somebody else that does have that problem. And when they do have that problem, then it feels like I'm actually solving something for them. So I don't get that internal dialogue of, oh, I'm pestering them, oh, I'm doing them a disservice. I genuinely believe that I feel like I'm helping them. Like you're struggling with something. I can fix that. I would be doing you a disservice if I didn't reach out and tell you I can fix it. That's how I think of it.
That's a killer mindset. Like, I feel like I would be doing a disservice if I didn't reach out to help you. I feel like
Yeah.
that is such a good mindset to have, because, and I say this to recruiters all the time, right? You essentially are changing people's lives. Think about how many candidates you've placed that
Yeah.
have been stuck in a bit of a rut. They've been, under market value, etc. And you place them in a job, and they're buzzing, they're super happy, and you're giving them a great salary increase. Or you've spoken to a sales director or hire it, because you do sales recruitment, right?
Yeah.
And they're like, we've got this area that we need to cover. We're losing market share, etc.
Yeah.
I'm getting it in the neck for my boss. And then you come in there, solve the problem, and find someone. And 6 months down the line, they're like, I've overachieved on target. We're absolutely smashing it. You are essentially changing people's lives. That is what recruitment
Yeah.
actually is from my perspective, and it sounds like it is from yours as well.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Like I think lots of people, and maybe it's because there's a really low barrier to entry in recruitment, but I think that lots of people's perception of the job or the impact that people have is just that it's really low value and it's really transactional. And actually, I think that it's one of the most. You hear business leaders talk about this all the time. I think everyone that's listening will probably see this. That people are the most important part of our business, and ultimately in a lot of scenarios, we are instrumental in helping shape that. That's really what we're doing. And actually, a business without its people just doesn't even exist. You can't build a good product without a great developing team, with a great development team. You can't sell a product. You could sell a product, but you probably aren't going to get the best out of it without a great sales team. So there's so many things that we do that directly impact not even just like people's lives day to day, but the stuff that our customers sell can also impact the world. So like it's a ripple effect that I just don't think people pay too much attention to. And I think if they did, they would see the value that they actually offer and wouldn't feel like they're pestering. They'd feel like they're actually doing somebody a service by calling them.
Yeah. So what about for a trainee recruiter that is listening to this show right now, or a recruitment consultant that
hmm
is either new to business development or still in that position, that phase of life where they, like I was saying earlier, where they're hoping it goes to voicemail. They don't necessarily feel like they can add a lot of value. I think what we've already said is definitely instrumental, but what advice would you give those people to shift their mindset, shift their approach to kind of, I guess, yeah, know their value and have that better mindset?
Um, That's a really good question. I think that's something that's going to be quite subjective because it's going to depend. So much of it depends on the environment that a person's in as well. Like if you're a recruiter in an environment where nobody believes the value of what they do, then it's a really hard thing for you to change because you can't see it. My advice if you're in that scenario would be actually try and reach out to somebody. You can reach out to me. That's fine. I'll have a conversation with anybody and try and help them. That's absolutely fine. But if you're in a scenario where it's just like it's more of an internal dialogue, I would, again, if you have customers, go back and ask them. If you have previous candidates, go back and ask them, what did I do? What impact did I make? Yeah, like what would you tell other people about me? Try and get that sort of information because that at a minimum should give you some level of internal validation that when you get an opportunity you're able to deliver on, that actually it is beneficial for the people involved. If you don't have that personally, if you're too early on, I would then go and ask the other senior people around me, can you give me an example of, can you speak to your customers so it's more collective, it's more holistic, like we as a business at Zest, we have helped X, Y, Z, and then you can kind of take that shared credibility, which should hopefully, again, enable you to not feel like you're being a pure pest. But ultimately, so much of this does depend on the business that they're working for, because some recruiters are genuinely, they are pests, and because actually if they're not offering any value, or if they are just shifting loads of CVs to people, is that super valuable? If I was a recruiter in that environment, would I feel like I'm actually fixing a real problem? Again, I don't know. I've just been really privileged to be involved in businesses that are really focused on fixing problems. So yeah, hopefully that answered your question, but that's a tough one to answer.
It is, yeah. No, I totally agree. I think the last time I was working with you guys, I mentioned about to shift a belief that you have, you've got first party evidence and third party evidence. So if I was a trainee and I worked by your side and I had no successes yet, I would ask you, and this is what I done when I joined Projectus. I literally sat down to literally 2 or 3 of the top billers, took them for lunch and just said, tell me exactly how you work, how are you successful, etc. That's third party evidence.
Yeah.
If you are in a position where you have, like you said, maybe a year or so of experience, maybe you're still a bit nervous about business development, but you have made some placements, you've done a 360 deal. I always used to tell myself and my team, go and get recommendations from your clients, kind of what you guys talk about with the NPS score, because that'll give you the first party evidence and it'll make you realize, actually, I am good at my job, and that will just like compound and it will help you with those limiting beliefs for sure.
100%. It is, and again, it's a snowball effect, isn't it? Right. That's the big thing is once you've got one and you believe you can do it, then you'll get two. Once you've got two, and it spirals after that. So again, I think the hardest bit will be if you haven't done a placement before, a 360 placement, and you're being tasked with just going out and winning new stuff. That's the first one's always the hardest, like anything new.
Yeah, absolutely. Something I wanted to pick on, something you just said a moment ago. So when I used to do, and to this day, obviously I still have to do business development for my business, you'll get a client where you maybe go onto a cold call and you want to kind of identify any of their pain points. Sometimes you're going to get someone that sits there and says, our internal team does a fantastic job.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't really had to use agencies. We're getting on fine. Now, what you said earlier, if they don't have the pain, if there isn't necessarily a need, you can't really sell to them.
Mm-hmm.
The devil's advocate I'm going to say is sometimes you get smoke screens from clients. How do you identify whether that is a smoke screen, whether they say, yeah, we're doing fine, but maybe you might know that actually they're not, to when they actually say they're fine and there is no pain?
It's all in the follow-up of the questions, isn't it? So if somebody says to me, I'm fine. Great. If you are fine, that's amazing. Can you talk me through what does fine look like to you? It's a really simple question. And then they give you context, and then from the context, I can assess from that whether that actually is fine, or if I'm able to beat what they perceive as fine, then I can talk to them a little bit more about that. Like you said, that was fine. Just out of curiosity, you said that you lost your top 3 candidates, but it was fine because the 4th person was really good. What would you do if you were able to hire the top 3 people just more predictably? What sort of impact do you think that would have on you? Or what sort of impact do you think that would have on the wider business? Like it's those, but you only get that. Again, my essentially what I'm saying is you'll always get the smoke screen. The real killer bit is in the second question that you ask after you get the smoke screen. So and again, all of it for me, it's just about asking for context. Oh, we're fine. What does fine mean? Oh, we're doing great. What does great mean? Like, oh, it's terrible. What does terrible mean? Like, I can't, without getting context and actual information, again, I can't assess if they're actually good or not on just like smoke and mirrors. You can't do it. And again, sometimes you'll ask that question and they'll just be like, look, I can't talk about this right now. Fine. Or genuinely, sometimes it might not be, I have no idea on that actually. It might be worth speaking to somebody in HR about that. That's probably more their remit. Cool. You can be, then you've got a two-pronged attack. Understand that's not in your remit, but do you think that would impact you? If we could fix that, if you could predictably hire the top 3 people, Mr. Hiring Manager, would that be beneficial for you? Yes. Okay. How would it be beneficial for you? What do you think when I go and speak to HR or go and speak to the internal recruitment team? They're going to say about this situation, X, Y, Z. Like then you can build a picture. So, but yeah, just like that's my whole thing. Again, I'm not doing this to really try and sell on that first conversation. I'm just doing it to try and understand, is it worth us collectively putting half an hour in the diary to go through this in a bit more detail? That's all that first.
I love that. I love that. I think a lot of recruiters, unfortunately, they don't understand what I used to do in training. I used to have like this GIF up on the screen of like this person digging. And I used to go through like linear questioning or chunking up, chunking down types of questions. If you ever ask somebody a question, like I always give this example to recruiters when they qualified a candidate, and it's like, what's the candidate's most important thing? Progression. Okay, why progression? Well, everyone wants progression. What does progression look like to them? Well, they're a senior software developer now, or they're a software developer now, so they want to be a senior software. Do they? I just assumed. So you've just assumed. So you could eventually screw this deal at the end, right? So it's just asking those questions, isn't it? It's like, why is that important to you? What else could be important to you? What does that actually mean? Tell me a little bit more about that and get the real answers. Like find the why behind the why. Otherwise, just sales in general is just so hard if you don't do that level of questioning.
I think it's impossible. Again, I just think you're shooting in the dark. That's my thought. And then ultimately, what you end up doing is you end up going in a downward spiral. You end up selling to people that don't actually have the problem, and then you think you're bad at sales, and then you think, oh, I don't like sales, and then you just stop doing it. Like that's genuinely the cycle. But so much of it can be underpinned by not asking those second 9 questions and actually trying to really understand the intricacies and the context of the problem. Because once you've got that, then you can actually make an educated, an informed decision. Without the information, it is genuinely just like stabbing in the dark. And also, I don't think that anybody that said, if they just gave me top line surface level context and I didn't dig, and then I asked for a meeting, I haven't built there's no gap, there's no value that I've built, or there's no like pain to value ratio. So why would they give me half an hour if I haven't even built that on the call? So there's so many things that we could go over on that bit, I'm sure. But
yeah. No, I totally agree. Well, before we move on to the next topic around retainers, I wanted to ask you something. It's just come to my head. I'm working on a project for one of my clients, and one of the you'll know all about this. Basically, creating them a handbook, a playbook, right? And one of the pages is all about cold call openers. Now, there's a lot of stupidly, it shouldn't be controversial, but there's a lot of controversy around permission-based openers, and then you've got the more traditional style. Now, I've used every type of cold call opener. Main reason why is because I get bored so quickly, and recruitment is quite monotonous, right? Like especially when I was in recruitment doing the same thing over and over, I had to do something different to the point where I would just say ludicrous things in my opener just so that people would be like, what the fuck is this? This is a bit random. Before we move on, what is your textbook standard cold call opener, if there is one?
I use 2. I do use a permission-based opener, something along the lines of, if I told you this was a cold call, would this make you want to throw your phone out the window? Something like that. Like I do use that. Or the other one that I do is just a little bit more disarming, slightly more confused. Essentially, I either use permission-based opener to be really upfront, or I use like slightly more confused to try and not trigger sales resistance. Typically what I'll do is I'll try permission-based opener first. I think certainly because I sell to sales leaders, they're a lot more receptive to it. When I sell to HR, I typically do like slightly more confused to it because I think HR leaders are or they're much more cognizant of salespeople calling them. And they think that, again, I think they have this is an assumption. My assumption is people that aren't salespeople have an idea about salespeople that they are going to try and make me do something I don't want to do. So I think with salespeople, you can just be a little bit more direct. Typically, the sales leaders that I talk to, I haven't got to sugarcoat it. So I can just be a little bit more direct with them. But actually, if I'm talking to, again, it could be HR, it could be people, it could be talent. I typically just try and play a little bit more of a confused tone and cadence in my voice when I'm talking to them. And typically that just gets them to open up. And again, as I said, my ideal for sales leaders is I don't care if I trigger sales resistance. I actually just want them to think this guy's pretty credible and sounds like he knows what he's talking about. I'll give him some time. With HR people, you almost just need to earn the time by not triggering sales resistance really early. So yeah, hopefully that helps.
Yeah, nice. So could you give us an example then of what the confused one is if you're going to speak to an HR manager or HR director?
So something along the lines of, hey, is this John? John, it's just Arran over at Zest. I wonder if you could help me out for a minute. Literally that. And then they're like, sure, yeah, what can I help you out with? And then fine. I was wondering if you could point me in the direction of the person that looked after your hiring processes and ensuring that they were just up to standard to ensure that you're able to predictably hire high quality salespeople. Do you know who might be able to help me with that? Actually, it's me, Arran. Or where are you calling from again? Like you get one of those two responses, and then I'm in. Like the conversation's live. They've asked me two questions. They haven't slammed the phone down. It's quite they're one of the two.
I like it. I think something that is very difficult from my perspective to train and to coach people on isn't the theory, isn't the actual. I could write the lyrics for anyone, right?
Yeah.
But I've written lyrics for people, and I've seen them deliver exactly that type of thing where they go, "Arran, hi, it's Charles here. Can you help me with something?" And they're like,
"Yeah, it's just
what? Who the fuck are you?
Yeah,
like,
who are you? Yeah,
what?
Yeah.
So it is all about that tone and that cadence. And I remember the first time you and I had that conversation, I was like, that's a really interesting approach. And I tried it a couple of times because I'm just I'm very curious as a person.
Mm-hmm.
And I've tried it a couple of times with recruitment founders, which, believe it or not, by the way, recruitment founders are Marmite. Either they just don't accept cold calls or they absolutely love it. It's really odd because you would think that they get their guys to cold call. But I've tried that before and gone along the lines of like, I'm just wondering if you could help me with something. And they're like, where are you calling from? And I was like, it's a funny thing, actually. I work for myself. I'm a self-employed recruitment coach and trainer with 10 years experience. But I was just curious. A lot of companies are investing at the moment, either external or internal, to train their staff because a lot of the newer generation recruiters typically look for one of three things, culture, D&I, or training and development. And I looked in your LinkedIn, didn't see you had someone internal. So just wondered what your strategy was for 2024. And typically people will go, yeah, do you know what? That's actually very interesting. We saw a poll about that, and it is something we need to do, but we haven't really got around to doing it. And then you just ask a few questions, and like you said, you're in. Once they've asked a couple of questions and given you a little bit, you're in.
Two questions back. Whatever those two questions are, that's commitment to a conversation. That is like one. Yeah, literally two questions. And in my mind, I'm in. It's really difficult, I think, to hang up on somebody after you've asked them two separate questions and they've spoken in between. So yeah, that's just my experience. And I think that works really well. That's worked really well for marketing and it's worked really well in HR.
Yeah, nice. So what about your cold call for like sales leaders? Because obviously, I recruited in medical device sales for about 5.5 years. And the next topic we'll talk about, which will tie in nicely with this about the mindset, because I've started contingent, then went over to exclusive, retained, etc. But even still, when I was a retained consultant, I found in my market, and it might be different for you, that one of two hooks worked really, really well. So if you were a manager within a surgical medical technology company, I call you and say, Arran, hey, it's Charles here calling from X company. Look, reason for the call here, I'm working with someone exclusively at the moment. They've got 5 years of experience. They previously worked for one of your competitors. SVT was 100% a target, 5 years running, and they've just come onto the market following the business being acquired. On paper, looking at the people working in your team, this person looks like they could be a fantastic fit for your business. Just curious to see what your thoughts would be on that. And 9 times out of 10, people go, oh my God, you're working with, that's an unbelievable candidate. We'll open doors for them. And then you transition into the problem solving and then all the rest of it. What about for you? Because I know that's more of a traditional one because it's like a verbal spec out, right? What's your typical sort of cold call opener?
For sales leaders, it is typically like, John, how would I, let me think about it. My typical cold call opener for a salesperson would be something along the lines of, John, it's Arran from Zest. I'll be really upfront. This is a cold call. It is a well-researched cold call. Can I get 30 seconds to tell you why I called you specifically? if you don't want to hear about it after that, chuck your phone out the window. You never have to speak again. Does that sound fair enough? That is literally
Yeah,
that.
nice.
Yeah, or some iteration of that, essentially. And again, typically, I typically try and do that. Or again, and that's me assuming that I haven't done too much research on them before I've cold called. If I've seen something that is a trigger, I'll mention the trigger there. So instead of saying it's a well researched cold call, I'll actually give the context and saying I saw X, Y, Z. Can I tell you why that prompted me to call you specifically? That's my iteration of it, I suppose.
Yeah, nice. Well, I appreciate we've been speaking for nearly half an hour on topic number one, but before we do move on, I wanted to ask you around that permission-based opener, because every time I've done it, and again, it goes back to what we said earlier about tone, cadence, etc. Right? Every time I've done it, it's worked. It's got me to have a conversation with people. Why do you think people are so reluctant to have their consultants do it, or why do you think some people just don't like them in general?
I think that people think it's probably a fad. Is my thought. I also think as well that with certain types of people, so much is about understanding your buyer context. That's why I have two, because I have different buyer contexts that will respond differently to different cadences, different ways of communication. Typically, again, there'll be outliers on both, but yeah, that, and I think it's all over LinkedIn, so people are like, surely it's saturated. But the reality is people aren't making cold calls at anywhere near the volume that people think they are. That's my perception anyway. Like, I speak to sales leaders and they're like, I've had 4 cold calls in the year. It's like, that's just mental.
Yeah. I agree with you on that last part. I saw somebody on LinkedIn post a video of them cold calling, and the opener was, "Hey Aaron, it's so and so. This is a cold call. I'm really sorry. This is a cold call. Would you like to hang up now, or have you got 30 seconds?" And the person just immediately replied saying, "Mate, I literally told you I'm not interested yesterday." And he was like, "Oh, I actually haven't called you. Like, you literally called me with the exact same opener yesterday." And he looked in his system. He was like, "I've looked at my system. It wasn't myself." And he was just like, "Mate, like, what are you calling about?" Like that. You could just tell the guy was just like, "Fuck's sake," because everyone is doing that exact same one. Now, what I liked about yours was, I like the funny part about, like, after 30 seconds, if you don't, you can throw your window out the phone. You never have to speak to me.
Yeah.
But just a couple of different things in the intro around the research. Like, what prompted me to call you was X, Y, and Z. Have you got 30 seconds? And if you don't like me after, then throw. Just that tiny bit of research immediately makes that permission-based opener slightly different.
Yeah, well, it's not straight out of the box, is it? And again, it does illustrate that you've done a little bit of grunt work up front before. It's not like they can't just be in a list, and I can't use that permission-based opener if there's nothing that's prompted me to give them the call. It doesn't work, right? So that's the big thing. It can't just be a random cold call with no research. That's what it removes. And I think that's really the cold call that infuriates people. If somebody cold called me and they said, and it was something that was bespoke, or I felt like I'd done a little bit of research, I'd definitely give them the time. Always. Like, what's the worst? They waste 30 seconds or a minute. It's like, come on, it's fine. The minute.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you said that, because episode 2 of my podcast is a solo session on me explaining why recruiters suck at cold calling in 2024. And section number 1 of that video was because people don't do any research. They have a list of 100 people and then just power through that list and wonder why they get no connects or no conversations. It's because you do no bloody research.
Yeah.
But anyway, the second topic, it kind of goes into what we were speaking about in the first part. I want to talk about your mindset shift when you went retained, because you started off doing contingent work, right? A pretty traditional approach to recruitment. Talk me through your mindset shift when you went from contingent to retained.
To be honest with you, I had a year in like 2018 where, and again, every recruiter will experience this, where, like, I looked at the amount of jobs that I'd won across the year and I had enough to do like double my target. So like 50% of the jobs that I won, I didn't fill. And that just really frustrated me that I'd wasted so much time. That, coupled with the fact that as a wider business at the time, we were trying to separate ourselves from the market. So we were trying to add in additional tools and actually try and productize a service. So that really helped me. I had a separate product that I could offer to market, and I was fed up with having my time wasted. So that just made for a recipe of just giving it a go. And actually, like, what I hear the most frequently from recruiters as to why they don't do it is, what happens if I don't fill the job? I was like, well, you do fill it. You just fill it, like, because there's actually there's actually commitment. Like that's the difference. I don't understand that. I never really understood it. Like what, because what we're not saying with the retainer is I guarantee that I'm going to fill the job with the exact person that you give me the brief on this call, Mr. Customer. That's not the commitment. The commitment is I will fix the problem for you. That's really what we're saying. But that might need to iterate over time. But you can't, you can't iterate, or it's really difficult to iterate a process or to get changes on a spec. Or how can you do that if you're competing with 4 people? Like you just can't. It's literally impossible. So that to me was the really big thing. The only other thing that it did for me as well is it got me to really stress test my relationship with my existing customers as well. People said they love me. Do you love me enough to cut off everyone else and pay me some money up front the next time we have a search? That was a really good lesson for me as well. So it was a combination of those things.
Yeah, nice. It's similar for me as well, right? I lost out on a few placements because I was so particular with the type of person I was sending across my clients. I was very vigilant and detail orientated with the spec. Probably the only thing I'm detail orientated on in life, right? And sometimes my boss would sit there and be like, "What about Arran Collymore? He's a decent fit." And I'm like, "The client wants 5 years experience. He's got 4. His sales versus target, they're okay, but like they want like a President's Club winner. So I don't know if I'm going to put him across. Mate, just send him across and just send another candidate that's really, really good." And I'm like, but he's not exactly what they're looking for. Next thing you know, another agency sent them across, sold them in really well. And they're gone, he's not really on spec, but we'll have an interview. Bosh, gets the job. And I was like, oh my God. So it really, really wound me up. And then I realized that when I transitioned to retained, I could do that. So I used to have a weekly call with every single one of my clients and say, look, there's a candidate here called Arran. Like, we'd go on a video call, right? Or if we're on the phone, I'd say, get your laptop up in front of you. Like, I want to open this guy's profile. I'm going to do it because we used to use the same thing as you. We did like video interviews and psychometric tests. Before I do that, I have qualified him. I think he could be a good fit. But looking at the CV is not entirely 100% on spec. Here's why I think he could be good. Here's why I think he might not be good. What are your thoughts? And 9 times out of 10, the client will go, I rate your honesty. I really, really love the fact you've done this. I think he's worth a shot. Let's see how he does on the video, and we'll interview them. And that for me, I was like, now I've planted a seed in their head. They're like, that's a good candidate, even if they're not on spec. And also, like what you were just saying there, you're constantly testing the spec, constantly trying to get flexibility, constantly challenging your client, which is what a recruitment consultant should do. You should be challenging your client and saying, actually, you shouldn't be looking for that. You should be looking for this, or you should be opening up your budget. This is what your competitors are doing. I could go on about that for ages, but that's what I loved about it.
Yeah, you're bang on. You're bang on. You're absolutely right. It's that is it to a T.
Yeah, 100%. So what about your mindset shift? So for me, I loved having a product to sell in recruitment. Some of the best recruiters I worked with were like spec out demons, but like very targeted. They have a very, 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 very small niche. Like one of my mates done cardiology in the German sort of DACH region, and he done sort of mid to senior leadership type level roles.
Yeah.
Very, very small market. Very small market. So if he found a really good candidate, he's going to place him. So he just done spec outs.
Yeah.
For me, I loved calling clients, solving problems and stuff like that. So like switching over to retained, I didn't really struggle so much. But for some people, there's that, you and I talk about this a lot, like the limiting belief in their head of like, a client's not going to pay me money up front
I didn't have
this.
I didn't have that.
So what do you think that is for certain people? Why do you think certain people have this mindset?
I think it comes back to the same thing that we spoke about earlier, just people not actually believing in the value that they offer. And actually, when we started offering additional services and additional bolt-ons to a contingent service, or even our exclusive offering was different, I just thought it was an absolute no-brainer. So I almost couldn't comprehend why people wouldn't give that or why people wouldn't choose that. So I had like the inverse effect. I was probably overly confident with prospects and customers, rather than sat there wondering like, why would anybody pay me? I thought, well, who wouldn't pay me if they have this problem? And maybe this is like chip on my shoulder. I don't believe actually that any time if I actually offer the retainer, because bear in mind I've done loads of qualification to get there, and I'm ruling them in and I'm ruling them out and they're ruling me out. If we got to the point that I'm actually pitching, I've genuinely believed that I'm the best person in the country or even in the world to fix that problem for you. That's my internal belief. Whether that is actually true in reality, I don't know. But that's genuinely what I taught the self-talk I have, or what's actually ingrained in my head, is there's nobody better than me at fixing that problem for you. So I can't comprehend why you wouldn't do that. So I didn't have that problem, Giles. But again, there were people in the team that certainly did. And again, I think that it was just that's an iterative process that people went through. They would work on a retained project that they hadn't won before. They realised they could deliver it. They'd take feedback from that, and then they would roll it into doing it themselves. So again, it's that whole social proof
Yeah.
we spoke about at the top.
I used to piss people off in my team so much when I was a sales manager, because they would have like a discovery call with a client and they'll go, yeah, they've got like 3 roles in Germany, 1 role in Austria, a role in Switzerland, and that's got retained project written all over it. They're like, it doesn't have to be retained. Like, if I sell the retainer, I can't fill the roles. Going back to what you said there, so many people are like, what if I don't fill the role? You'll fill it. Like, also, if you take the job spec on and you feel like you're struggling, you're going to have a weekly check-in call with the client. You can just educate them on how you're getting on. Show them your LinkedIn project. Show them how many people come up. Show how many people in the database. Get flex on the project and go again. But that's got retainer written all over it. Like, and you guys are experts at this because you've got 100% success rate on retained projects. I had 100% success rate on retained projects because it fucking works.
Yeah, genuinely. And actually, but so much of this, right? What I don't want to happen is I don't want people that are listening to think I'm just going to pitch retain to everyone, because that's not what I'm saying. You have got to be really, really critical about who you take on as a customer if you're going to work retain. Because if you take on a retained project with a company that you know is terrible, that you know pays below market, that is just going to be an absolute nightmare for you, then you are setting yourself up to fail. But my argument would be you shouldn't work that contingently anyway. So the customers that you want to work with, if they're good, then they should be retained. If they're not retained, then actually they probably shouldn't be a customer because they're bad. That's my thought process. But yeah. Anyway,
honestly, it's like with psychic. It's like with psychic, because that was going to be my next question. Actually, is like, how do you rule out a customer who should be retained and who shouldn't? But what you've just said there is masterful. If they're paying under market rate, if they've got a terrible reputation, if they've got a crap product, the management is awful, retention rate is dreadful, and they're not willing to change any of that. Because don't get me wrong, I love a challenge, and I've worked with businesses before that have said historically we have been awful at retaining staff. We've had terrible management. Products weren't the best in the market, but here's how we're changing. If you're showing me that you're actually willing to change and saying, you educate me, Arran, you're my recruiter, you're an extension of my brand, I'm paying you money up front, how can we go around retaining staff? How can we go around changing our culture? How can we go around paying better salaries? What are our competitors paying? How can we make our commission structure better? If you are showing me that, and you're willing to pay me money up front, I'm going to work that job and I'm going to get you the best people in the market for sure.
But that's my point, is that like I use the retainer pitch in those situations to rule it in or rule it out. If somebody is genuinely serious about fixing the problem, then actually a tiny investment up front is, again, and also what we're not doing, we're not asking, it's not additional. That's the other thing I think people think about. It's like, why would they're paying you the money to fill the job anyway. You're just taking a little bit of the money up front. Doesn't matter.
That goes back into the mindset as well. That I always say this to people, because I train so many companies and recruiters to sell retainers and things like that. Like, think about it. Be creative, right? Like when I used to get on a discovery meeting with a client or go to the commercial meeting with the client, they've got the HR manager on there, the sales director on there, and they say, we're a bit funny about paying any sort of money up front. And I'm like, right, okay, let's just say the fee is 10 grand. You pay me 2.5 grand up front. And then once we complete the project at the end of the month, it's 7.5K, right? If you want, we could do it however you want. So we could do 2.5 grand up front. Then we can do 5 grand upon completion of the project when they sign the contract. Then 2.5 grand once they pass their probation. And then I'll be super generous. And if they don't pass their probation, I'll do you a free replacement. And if I can't deliver the service I've promised you, if I can't find you candidates, if I'm not getting back to you, if I'm ghosting you and I'm being like the recruiters that you've had in the past, well, I'll tell you what then, that 2.5 grand up front, you can have that money back. But the only thing is if you change the brief, you change the hiring manager, you dick me around, then I'm keeping that money because I've invested my time into that. And you know what? Every time I explained it to a client like that, I had clients sometimes say, we'll do it in thirds. Sometimes they'll say, can we just pay you $1 grand up front? Sure. Sometimes they'll say, can I pay 50% up front? It's just a fucking commitment. That's what it is.
Yeah, I'm with you. To me, it's less about the actual money. It's more about just illustrating their intent or their commitment to the partnership. That's all I actually care about. And ultimately, there's skin in the game from both, because there is definitely more pressure for you to deliver on a retained project than there is on a contingent. If you can't fill a contingent job, who loses? No one. Actually, the person that loses is the candidates normally in that scenario, but you don't really lose. You've wasted your time, but you knew that going into it anyway. And the client hasn't lost anything because they didn't expect you to fill the job anyway, which is why they haven't paid you anything up front.
Yeah, you're spot on, mate. There's two
Yeah.
questions before I move on to the last topic. I've got to say this out loud so I remember that I don't forget this. There's 3 reasons why people won't pay for a retainer. That will be the question I'll go on to in a second. But the first question I wanted to ask you and I, when we have sold retainers, we have had, video platform to sell alongside it. We've had psychometric analysis. Now, I work with companies and I've spoken to businesses that are advertising on the website. They've got the contingent and then the retained, but then their retained project is basically just contingent, but just with money up front. Yeah, so I find it difficult because, look, I think if I was a client and let's just say, for example, my coaching business explodes and I want to hire 2 L&D consultants and you're a recruiter that recruits directly for L&D consultants, but you didn't have any additional things, but you had a proven track record and said, Charles, look, I only take on X amount of clients. If you pay me $1,000 up front for both of these positions and I work my ass off, maybe it's because of my bias. I obviously believe in retainers. I'd probably be more susceptible to go through with that.
Yeah.
But what is your opinion on companies that have like a retained offering, but actually don't have like a product or anything that kind of goes along with that retained solution?
My advice there would be have two different things that you fix. So I would the difference for me, I think I've said this, but and again, at Zest we only sold for one. But when I was doing contingent and retained, we sold for 2 problems. So the first problem we solved for, if you just want quick CVs and it's just it's an attraction problem, do contingent, that's fine. If it's an assessment problem, then that's where you have to have retained. That's where it has to be retained, because there is just more investment from us from a time stamp. And again, that isn't just a we work harder. That's a materially we are going to sit with your hiring managers to help coach them through the right interview questions to ask. So actually a bit of an audit of your hiring process. That's something we massively undervalue. I've interviewed more, I'd imagine, more candidates than probably any hiring manager in my market currently. I imagine I have. I've been doing it for 10 years, so I probably have. And that's something we really underestimate our value on. So there are things like, there's loads of things that we could do around improving the questions that your hiring managers are asking. There's a lot of the stuff actually that internal TA teams do. So I think that will work really well with non-TA teams. I don't know, because I've never done this, I don't know how you would sell a retainer to a team that have internal TAs if you don't have anything that is objectively different to a contingent search. I can imagine that being pretty tough. But I think no TA team, that's what I would do. I would essentially just look at what a TA team is doing, and I would try and fix that for them, essentially.
That's an interesting point. I think the only caveat to them having an internal team and being quite troublesome to pitch retainers to, the only time where I think it won't be as difficult is if the company have the TA hiring office managers, administrators, like low level stuff, but high volume. And now they have like a business development manager that's like 100K a year, etc. That's where, I totally agree. I think for me as well, this is really good. I always learn on these podcasts that the biggest takeaway is that if you don't have a product to offer, and I think largely that video platform that you and I use, I mean, I've used Hinterview, iIntro, Odro, etc. Is that going to be best value for someone that recruits software developers and engineers? Maybe not. Probably not, because they're just sat at home like coding. For salespeople, I think it's a no-brainer. But
for sure.
For you to then say, as part of the retained search, we'll sit down with all your senior management and understand and identify how they're hiring. And I spoke to a ED&I specialist yesterday who's coming on the show, and she was talking about utilizing that in your BD and this will go into your retained project of like, look, we've been upskilled on ED&I. You might not be aware of your internal biases. Like I just said a moment ago about my bias would be like retained, cool, I'll go for it. But some of these hiring managers, and look, I was that hiring manager as well. I sat down with a kid similar sort of age to me, loved MMA. I was like, yeah, he's got the job.
Yeah.
What the fuck am I doing?
That's my point. Like, and that's essentially when I talk about like fixing processes, I think that But then I think there is like elements of magic in recruitment, right? Or there's elements of magic when you hire a person. There should be that wow factor. But I also think that you should have a predictable system to be able to accurately quantify, can this person actually do the job? Like, can they do the job to the standard that I want them to do the job? And then again, if they are if they're a 10 out of 10 fit for us culturally, that to me is a Brucey bonus. If in the right context, it's a Brucey bonus. But so much of it is hiring managers or hiring companies just going to market saying, hiring manager, you're head of sales, run with it. It's like, they ain't got a clue. They haven't got a clue. A lot of the time, they don't. They haven't got a clue. Again, if they've hired, even if they've built 4 teams, and if those 4 teams are 30 people, so they've hired 60 people, people in recruitment do that a year. And that's their whole career. You've done that in your whole leadership career. It's like you can't compete from skills, coupled with the fact that we can cherry pick all of the best bits from all of the other companies in their market. It's such an underrated thing that I just don't think people leverage enough. Is where I'm going with it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I've actually had the pleasure of sitting in face-to-face interviews and video interviews with clients, and sometimes you see them asking questions, and you're just like, "What the fuck is the point in this? Like, what type of question is that?" So you're absolutely right. Well, last thing on the topic around retainers, then, Arran. You said to me, and I've taken this in. There's 3 reasons why a client won't work with you on a retained basis. Yeah. What are the reasons why a client won't do that?
So typically red tape, which is stupidly rare, doesn't happen very often. The next thing is, to be fair, typically if they don't trust you, that's what it really boils down to. It's typically they don't trust that you're able to fix the problem for them. What did I tell you, Charles? What were the 3 I told you? I want to see if I've changed them.
You might have. The last one you said to me before was budget. So it's like the money thing. And what you said to me was similar to what you said about the red tape. So this is common with me as well, with a startup who doesn't necessarily have a lot of money, which 9 times out of 10 is bollocks. They go, we don't have the money in the bank. I think that's bullshit, because if I then placed a candidate with you today and I had to invoice you 10 grand, you'd find that 10 grand, but I'm asking you for a grand up front. That's why I always used to challenge that. The red tape is more common for like SMEs, not necessarily startups, because startups you're dealing with a sales director who's a co-founder, right? But for a mid-sized business, and they go, right, the director of HR is based in Amsterdam, the VP of HR is based out in San Francisco, and the chief people officer is also based out in San Francisco. We also need to get signed off by the FD in Amsterdam, the MD in the UK. That's like, okay, do you know what? I might as well just get some gentleman's agreement to work on this exclusively, because by the time I get this money up front, it's just like a waste of time. But the main one is the trust.
Yeah, that's really what it boils down to. A lot of it, so much of it, all of that can be underpinned by trust. And again, even with the red tape one, like we recently signed one with a business that are massive, bit like, I don't know, billions and billions and billions, huge company. And that took, I'm going to say we started speaking to them in September of last year. And again, we could have taken that in January or February of this year and just worked it, but we didn't. We held fast because, again, we looked at the big problem. Their big problem was it needed that, really. It genuinely needed our retained service. So, but again, and that took calls with people from, again, Amsterdam, Germany, France, England, like all over. But sometimes it is worth doing that. So I don't want people to think, again, just rule it out if it's red tape. Again, you have got to use a bit of common sense or a bit of sense there. But basically, in my mind, all of it is underpinned by I don't trust you, really. That's what I think the main focal point is. And the reason they don't trust you typically could be either you're selling to the wrong person, it's genuinely not a big enough priority or problem for them, so they just not interested, or you just haven't done a good enough job at educating them on why you are the person to fix it. That's really what it boils down to.
Yeah, I think it's really important to take accountability, because I had a phenomenal track record at pitching and selling retainers, and I had a load of people come in and sit in the face-to-face pitch with clients, and people would always come out with a notebook full of notes like, oh my God, that was incredible, I love the question you asked here, etc. But obviously I've had times where I've pitched services and retainers where clients have come back and said, you know what, we're going to go with this other agency or whatever. And in my mind, and you and I are very similar, I'm like, they're mental not to work with me. I'm the best at this. I know everyone in this market. The product that I have to offer is unreal. But you have to take your ego aside for a moment and go, okay, there must have been something I've done there that wasn't up to scratch, or maybe I forgot to ask a certain question. Maybe I didn't find out the bad news. Like, what could I have done differently? And I think these days, any companies that have invested in tech where you can watch your video meetings back, listen to your calls back, I know so many recruiters these days that do that, and they listen back
Yeah,
to their calls religiously, and you
yeah,
just see them improve so
of
much.
course, of course, of course. That's yeah, that 100%. I think it's a really important thing from a learning standpoint, because actually when you're in the moment, it's really difficult to remember what you've said when you're actually focused on the conversation, to remember, did I ask that question? Didn't I ask that question? Or unless you have a really like formulaic way of selling, it's quite difficult to do. And even then, you should still listen back, because you can still make iterations, even if it is a formulated process. But yeah, bang on.
100%, mate. 100%. And well, look, conscious of time, the last topic I wanted to go through with you, because I think, you know, from where I've been working with you, I've certainly learned a lot about different approaches to BD and a unique approach to BD. We kind of talked a little bit about your approach to start with, but what I've written down here is that your sort of approach to business development, you start off with a potential cold call or a warm call, just essentially you call
Yeah,
them,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Then there's a discovery meeting, and then you
yeah,
have like the sales pitch, then you've obviously got the sending proposal, then you've got like closing. So there's like a variety of different steps. Now, as someone that's like a top biller expert in that sort of area, I wanted to kind of get you to break down those steps. Don't need to be too long, because
cool.
I think a lot of recruiters these days, and to be honest, I was certainly like this when I was in my early 20s. You expect that you call a client up and they answer the phone, and then bosh, you've sold a retainer, or bosh, you've got a
Yeah.
job on, and then you get CVs and you're hitting your KPIs. Doesn't work like that. It takes some time. So just tell us or talk us through what your sort of typical approach is to going and winning a new client.
Yeah, cool. So I think you kind of nailed it there, but the reality is my first step is a cold call of some description. It could be deemed as a warm call. But that call, I think I've mentioned a couple of times in this conversation, is purely just to understand, do they even have a problem that I fix? That's all I want to identify. And is that problem large enough for them to want to spend half an hour with me to understand a little bit deeper, I suppose? Then I go on to a discovery call. I try and get that done pretty quickly. I try and get that done really within 48 hours if possible. It's not always possible, but that's my ideal, because I want it to still be pretty fresh. If I can find half an hour in the next 48 hours, that conversation is genuinely just a more structured time where I can actually ask deeper questions, really try and understand not only what the problem is, but the wider impact of that problem. And then I try and get them to commit to agreeing that it's a problem worth solving. If they agree it's a problem worth solving, I then move on to the second stage. I usually, at that stage, in the discovery stage, I also try and find out who else is impacted by this, and then I try and have conversations with them in between. So I usually try and leave a week, is ideal, a week in between discovery and presentation, because that gives me enough time to maybe have a couple of other discovery-ish type calls with the VP of marketing or the CT or whoever else might be involved in it, right? And then I try and get everyone together for that meeting. That's a week later, and there I am typically presenting. Understand, has anything changed? Is this still a problem? Do we all still want to fix this? Great. Let me give you an overview on how we fixed it. This is really just a run through of our platform, our product, some case studies, testimonials, that sort of stuff, answering any questions. And then I essentially move forward. I try and get some sort of verbal commitment as well there on price, or I mention price normally in that conversation, so it's not a complete shock to them. Then I send a proposal with actually what I do after that is I send individual follow-ups to everybody saying, thank you for your time. This was really useful. These are the key things I think might be interesting to you. Here's some information that might help you. I'll get a proposal over collectively to everybody at this time. Then I send a proposal. Then the proposal goes, and then I can follow up with my champion usually to try and help get things pushed over and closed. And that's typically my process.
Yeah, nice. And how long does that process typically go on for? Obviously, you mentioned, by the way, we're recording this today in September, and Arran earlier in the show literally said that he's just sold a retainer when he spoke to them, last September, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
obviously, not always does it take that long, but typically, if you follow this process and it's going fairly well, how long will that typically take?
I think that you can add 3 customers in 90 days. I think from standing start 90 days, 90 to like, about 3 months would be my suggestion. And I think it could, 3 accounts in 3 months. But I wouldn't be looking at like 1 in every month. It would be more like, I think that there's a really good chance that you will close 3 in late month 2, early month 3 is what I would imagine, rather than closing 1 in month 1, 1 in month 2, 1 in month 3. But the hardest bit is actually finding people at the right time, is finding on that cold call, finding them when they're in the right time to actually want to make that change. That's the hardest thing. But once somebody is there, then typically like 2 or 3 weeks from there.
Yeah, it's honestly this job. That's the most savage part of it. I always say to people, like, especially recruiters that are struggling, they're like, they've made 300 dials and they've got no connects and no one wants to speak to them. Mate, this job, your life can change after one call. And you hear recruitment founders say this to their staff all the time, like, your life can change after one call. And so many recruiters that haven't had that one call yet have no idea. And for me, my fondest memory was like slogging away, working a bunch of contingent jobs. And one of my good mates that I worked with, Jack, literally called me about 5 o'clock on I think it was in February 2017. And he goes, mate, I've just had an interview with this company. I'm not going to take it, but the hiring manager, she's awesome. I think you could really, really help her out. She's really been struggling. He texted me her mobile number. I called her. I caught her in the most peak client pain you could ever think of. Her sales director from Italy came all the way down to come and interview. 5 out of the 10 people never turned up. 3 out of the other people weren't actual salespeople. She's obviously interviewed this guy that she wanted to offer, but he took a job with another blue chip. So she had all the pain in the world. That account turned out to be, it generated 250 grand in that year alone, because we've done their entire team building. It was my first proper retained account. So honestly, like, what Arran's just saying there about how things can take time and all the rest of it, you have to be patient. Sometimes it is a lot of catching people at the right time, but if you're making the cold calls, which unfortunately not many recruiters are doing that at the moment, if you're making those cold calls and you're doing the research and actually making sure that you've got better quality than quantity, but then also I always say to people, if your quality is good and you're still not getting results, you still need to up the quantity a little bit, then eventually you could make one phone call and your life can change. It really can.
Yeah, no, for sure. That is yeah, bang on. You are always one call away from changing your week, month, quarter, year, life. So just keep your head down, keep plugging away. Again, I'm not saying that in jest to be like just keep going. There's obvious, if it's not working and you've tried something for 3 months, then tweak it. Like don't just go on aimlessly. But I think people massively underestimate the amount of touch points and the amount of conversations that are no's to actually get that yes. And I think we said it is if you're super attached to that person saying yes or no to you every time you cold call somebody, it just temperamentally it would just batter you, or emotionally it would batter you. But yeah, maybe I'm just fortunate, but it doesn't bother me, thankfully.
Yeah, well, you've also done it for a long time, right? I think a lot of people, when they get into recruitment, especially people that get into recruitment, are very young, right? And people don't really understand how their own mind works, how their emotions work, how their state changes their physiology, how it changes your tone. Now it gets to a point where, I'm sat at home in my home office by myself. I have to do my own business development by myself. Do you know how many times I've had clients sit there and be like, mate, I'm working with this person, or no, I'm not interested, or fuck off. I've had that a couple of times,
Of course, yeah.
which is odd. And
really
because
weird,
I've had so much rejection in my life, it's just like water on a duck's back. Do you know what I mean? So it's just reps. It's just a muscle, basically. But sure. Look, we're coming to the end of the show then, Arran. So the question I ask everybody at the end of the show is, following today's episode, what can people do to be 1% better in recruitment?
It's a great question. My thought is I would pick 2 things. I would either pick really get really diligent on the problem that you're fixing, really think about the problem that you're fixing, and then take that to market and see if that actually works. The second thing would be probably what we mentioned right at the end. Don't try not to get hung up on the rejection and all the rest of it, and just keep your head down and keep going. And I think if enough people just keep going, then over time, with small tweaks and improvements, you'll be more than 1% better.
Absolutely incredible. Love it. Well, Arran, thank you very much for coming on. Honestly, it's been one of my favorite episodes, and I don't say that to everyone, honestly. Like, I said this at the start. No, I said this at the start, didn't I? Like, every single time you and I sit down, we end up having just phenomenal conversations. We're obviously both very passionate about the recruitment industry. And, I've obviously worked with yourselves and Callum. Callum was one of my first clients. And I remember the first time I met him, I said, I've looked at your website and looked at your LinkedIn, and I showed him my phone, and it said, trying to change the perception of recruitment. And we both looked at each other and was like, oh, mate, this is a match made in heaven. So honestly, I genuinely think anyone that listens to this is going to take incredible amounts of value. You're someone that even I take a lot of value from, and I learn from. I've even learned on this show, for goodness sake. So thank you very much for coming on. You mentioned, obviously, for people wanting to reach out to you, what's the best way to reach out to you?
LinkedIn, hit me up. LinkedIn's fine. Yeah, hit me up.
Awesome.
I'm always happy to help.
Love it, mate. Thank you very much. And hope everyone enjoyed the show, and take care.
Thanks. Cheers.